Well, that's a discussion for another day, I guess. But today we're talking about negotiating offers. So we'll assume that you've already written an offer and now we're negotiating. So what are the three options that if you were representing a buyer, you send in an offer to a seller, what three possibilities could occur? Hang on, Alex.
Sorry. I'm thinking you're saying above asking, and below. Or is that
Okay.
where you're going with that? Or?
Not quite. So I guess maybe rephrase the question. What are the responses that the seller could give you?
Oh, they could ignore you, they can accept it, or they can counter.
Yep. And when we call it, and what do we call ignore in the real estate world? Reject. Yep.
Oh,
So they could reject it, they could accept it, or they could send you a counter offer. All right. The easiest way is, or the most exciting is what? Hey, they accepted your offer just as it is. Nothing changed. We love what you have, so we're going forward. Obviously, it can be disappointing sometimes to get a rejection, right? Nobody likes to be rejected. But that's gonna happen. And so part of us as agents is to take the emotion out of the process, right? We've got to be careful not to get ourselves too emotionally charged up, because what happens to our negotiating ability if we're acting emotionally? Yeah, we may not think clearly. We could give up information that we probably shouldn't have that could lose our negotiating position. Anything else? We may offend the other side, and then that can destroy a relationship. And so we may have lost an opportunity to have our client get this house simply because now the realtor hates us because we were rude to them, right? And guess what? That has happened. I have had those experiences. Luckily, I haven't been, as far as I know, the rude one, right? Try not to. But there are occasionally situations where you'll find that it's not easy to deal with the other side, right? But most agents are actually very easy to work with, because most agents have this understanding that have you guys heard of the Y4C2Ts? Okay, these are some of the values that we have with Keller Williams. It's not over there, but yeah, the Y4C2Ts, this is what we believe. All of these qualities that our agents should embody. Is there any, look through these, is there one of these specifically that you feel like applies really, really well to negotiating? And what our mentality should be when we go about negotiating?
Communication.
Communication is good.
Maybe integrity, because you could like try to sell them on something that's
Okay. Integrity is important. Still not the one I'm looking for though.
Win-win.
There it is, win-win. When we have a win-win mentality, what does that look like?
Both sides win.
Both sides win. Is that possible? Is that even possible? Because you're trying to sell somebody something. Is it possible to get a win-win from that? How? So again, we'll go back to our situation. You're representing a buyer, you send in an offer. How can you make a win-win out of that?
They accept the offer.
Okay, they could accept it. What if they don't? Still possible? Yeah, that's what negotiating is, right?
I think it comes from asking the right questions to get the right needs.
Yeah.
Because you could have a lower offer but close and get accepted just because you asked the right question and you understood the other party needs better than a higher offer.
Yeah, so James brings up a really, really good point, and that is that we need to figure out what the needs are of not only our client, but their client. Why? Why would it be helpful for you as an agent who represents a buyer to know what is important to the seller? How does that make a difference for you at all?
Then we know what to offer.
Exactly,
Whether
yeah.
it's a lease back or, a seller concession, whatever it may be.
Yeah, we know what terms they're looking for, what specifics. Maybe there's certain deadlines that are more important for them. But we don't represent the seller, right? Our fiduciary duty is to our buyer in this situation. So is that okay to consider their needs as well? If so, why? Because ultimately, who are we looking after?
Buyer.
we're looking after our client. Because if we give them seller an offer that they said needs A, B, and C, and we give them A, B, and F, are they gonna accept it? Probably not. Maybe they will. In this market, that may happen more often than not because we do have a little more neutral market where a lot of times these homes are sitting on the market for a while and sellers have to give up some of their priorities of what they're looking for. And so they may be willing to accept it. And again, that's where our negotiating comes in. That's where your experience comes in into knowing what you should or should not ask for to represent your client in the best way. But ultimately, finding out what their needs are is crucial to the success of you getting an offer accepted. Because to your client, maybe they don't care if they close on February 2nd or February 3rd. To them, that may not make a difference. Could that make a difference to a seller? Can you think of a reason why that hypothetically could be true?
They're trying to get into the property they bought,
Yeah.
maybe by February 1st.
There you go. Maybe they are trying to buy a property and they're closing on that property on February 2nd. So they need this property to close by February 2nd so they can have the funds for that one. That happens all the time. And that's just one small example, but there could be. They may not care, right? I sold a house this week that the mother had passed away and the kids were selling the house, and like the kids are all financially in a fine spot. Like they didn't need the money today versus tomorrow. So in their case, it didn't matter, right? But every situation is different and there's going to be a reason for them to care about other things. So who holds, this may be a trick question, and maybe this isn't a great question, but we're going to go for it anyway. Who holds the negotiating power? Like I don't know how to ask this. I'm just going to tell you. Whoever has more information is who holds the negotiating power. Oftentimes we believe that the market dictates the negotiating position, but I'm going to tell you right now, that's not always true. I'm going to give you an example. Are you guys familiar with what it means to be in a neutral market? We're all fairly new here, so totally raise your hand if you're not, and I'd be happy to explain a little bit more about what that is. Okay, perfect, thank you. So what we've experienced a year ago, and then the previous like 10 years almost, was what we'd call were we in a buyer's market or seller's market? Anybody know? Who held the negotiating position more often than not? Sellers. And why was that?
So much demand.
There was way more demand, way more people wanting to buy houses than the houses we had to sell. Okay, so whenever that happens, it's simply, the simple basic economics where it's supply and demand. The more supply there is, we're in the opposite way, but there's not very much demand. What happens to prices? They go down, right? So we have been in the opposite for a long time, where there was so many people wanting to buy homes that they were willing to pay above and beyond what it takes to get into a house. And that happens so often. But the last year has totally shifted. You guys have probably gotten sick of hearing the word shift, right? I don't know if I'm sick of it, but I hear it every single day in this industry. Shift. We're going through a shift. Why is that such a big deal? Why does that matter to us as agents? First of all, Alex?
We're in that weird lull of not really sellers, not the buyers. It's been a
Okay.
weird time.
Yeah, so we call that more of a neutral market where there's not an even amount of buyers and sellers, but it's definitely a lot closer. Anytime when you're closer, then that's what we consider a neutral market. There's data and numbers that we go through to figure out where we're at with months of inventory and things like that we won't get into today, but that's the general idea, is that we're at a more neutral market where we have a more even amount of buyers versus sellers. So because of that, in general sense, does any one of those parties have a clear higher negotiating power? No, they're both kind of at an even playing field, right? However, I will tell you that there are situations where you can make that different. So just recently, we sold a townhome in Vineyard, and my clients did an awesome job with the staging, and we helped them with that. It was a very popular home. They had done some renovations to it, and we priced it really well. We did an awesome job with the marketing. So we did all the things that we needed to do. And guess what happened? Just a month ago. You guys heard the term multiple offers? Okay, if you're representing a seller, how does that feel when you get the seller multiple offers?
Great.
5 stars, right? Like that's what we're aiming for, right? Because it shows them that, especially when we can get those right away. And that's what happened for them. So guess what? That still can happen. Those deals are out there. But guess what? Also, they went and we helped them find a house to buy, and that home had been on the market for 80 days. So who held the negotiating position there? My buyers. And who held the negotiating position on their sale? Sellers, right? So they actually, these one clients held the negotiating position on both sides. And that's why I think it's so cool to be in a neutral market, because there are those opportunities out there if you as an agent can help your clients find them, which is awesome. Feels really good. But yeah, we're kind of talking about win-win, and is it possible to get a win-win? The seller has needs, your buyer has needs, and the closer you can get your buyer to meet the needs of the seller, the more likely you are to come to an agreement with them, right? But we have to know what's important, because not everybody's going to care about the dates. Most people do care about the price, right? That's probably the number one factor, but oftentimes it's beyond the price. There's other terms in the contract that you can negotiate to make up for that. What's something that's been common a lot lately with lending that we can help buyers get? The 2-1 buy down, right? I had never heard of that word 6 months ago, never. And I've been in the industry for 5 years, never heard of it, right? Didn't know it existed. Why? Why didn't I know that?
You need it?
We've never used it. We've never had a reason to use it. If you were a seller, if you were a buyer and you went to ask the seller to pay for $15,000 in closing costs a year ago, you were putting your offer right at the bottom. Like, there is no chance that's going to happen, right? But today, is that happening? All the time. So it's important to keep up with the market to know what your negotiating position is. It's also important to recognize that because every market is different, maybe you're working with a buyer that has sold or bought a home before in a different market, or maybe they have a parent or a close friend that has sold or bought a home in a different market. Why is it important to have this conversation with them beforehand that the market is different today?
Expectations.
Yeah, you gotta have them set the expectations, because if they're like, yeah, 2 years ago, my parents sold their home, they got 15 offers in 3 days. Today, is that likely to happen? No. Like I said, it can, and we got multiple, but our multiple was 3, so that was still great, but like, there are homes getting 40, 50 offers all the time. So it is important to help set those right expectations so that when they do present themselves when they do find themselves in a position to make an offer, they have a better understanding of what today's market looks like, right?
I
Sure.
got a question more so about market conditions. Last week, so I missed this week's team meeting, the last team meeting, Dean said that we are not yet transitioned into a buyer's market. Why is that the case, even though there's a lot of seller concessions as of right now?
Yeah, that's a great point. Because of the data. The data shows that right now we're at 4.7 months of inventory. And in order to be in a standard neutral market, it has to be between 5 and 7 months of inventory. So that's what the data shows. But what we don't see is that we had below 1 month of inventory like a year ago. And so we've gone from 1 month of inventory to 4.7, which in less than a year, which feels like we are shifting way faster towards a buyer's market because we've changed so drastically, when really we're actually not quite there yet anyway. So, yeah.
Kind of add to that too, like towards the end of the year, we were at like 9,500 homes on the market, or it's like, sorry, 7,500 homes. And since then, we've kind of been stayed around that number. So like
Yeah.
inventory hasn't
Been a little more stable.
Yeah, it hasn't gone up a ton. It's kind of been stable.
Yep. Now, if anybody wants to, this is another plug for, this is not just a Livian thing. This is for everybody, agents inside and outside the brokerage. We do every Monday, a Market Monday, where we talk about national data. We have an economist that comes to join us every week on Zoom. And then we talk specifically about Utah County as well. And like, because of this data, these are the types of conversations that you need to be having with your sellers. And these are the types of things that they need to know in order to help them make whatever decision is right for them. Because the data and the market absolutely matters, and it can affect drastically people's decisions. So we need to be better educating them on what's going on to help them make whatever decisions matter. So you guys are all welcome. 11 o'clock in the Gary Keller room every Monday.
Do you stream it?
We don't. Yeah, we just have it in person. Okay, any questions or any comments so far about negotiating? My goal is that by the end of this, you don't feel intimidated by negotiating. That is a very important part of your job. And that is that is one of the reasons why many buyers and sellers hire you as an agent so that you can negotiate on their behalf.
The thought that's, in my mind too, is you're not alone in negotiating. Like, especially being in KW, you have like Dean, you have other people that can help you.
Yep.
So like, I know on my first transaction, I got double eyes on everything.
Yeah,
Like I was
Smart.
negotiating concessions and I was like, I'd ask another agent, I'd ask my broker, I'd ask everyone. So then I was like, okay, I know what I feel and I know what everyone else has said.
Yep.
And then you move forward. So it's like, you're not as alone as you think you are.
I love that. One of my biggest pet peeves when I go to a restaurant is when we ask for an order, especially because, and this is totally fine, but like my wife likes her food a certain way. So she'll ask, usually, she won't just ask for the plate, she'll ask for the plate, but minus this and plus that, right? My biggest pet peeve is when I get a waiter or waitress that comes and does not write it down. Because what happens, maybe 75% of the time when they bring back our food, something's wrong, right? And so, we have to get it fixed and that takes more time and all that, right? Do you think I'm more impressed with somebody that gets it right, even though they wrote it down, versus somebody that gets it right and they didn't write it down? Do you think I really care?
Well, as long as it's done.
I don't care if they write it down or not, but as long as it's done right. I had a transaction that I was representing the buyer on, and this was something early that I learned, that they worked with a mortgage officer that was just absolutely not experienced at all. They're brand new. There's nothing wrong with being brand new as long as you get the help where you need it. Well, this mortgage officer did not seek help in any way. And two, she had been telling them that, their closing costs were gonna be $7,000 or whatever. So my buyers who did not have a lot of money saved up, they got what they needed. They went to go buy this house. We were under contract. 3 days before closing, my buyers get a call. And the lender said, oh, I overlooked this and this and this. You actually need to bring $15,000 to the closing table. How would that feel? That was horrible. Lucky for them, they had a parent who had money that let them, they call it a gift, right? But they kind of lended the money to the parents and they paid them back later on. They had to do it, and for them, they decided that was best move for them, and I'm glad they did, because it was a time in the market where homes were going up a lot, so they eventually got that all back and more. That was a really tough couple of days for them to hear, all because, in my opinion, not because the mortgage officer was new, it was because the mortgage officer was new and did not seek help, did not get double eyes. I was also fairly new as an agent, so I didn't know to ask the right questions as to who you're working with and why and what their track record and where did you find them and all that. It's much better to have a trusted professional working with them, whether it's for mortgage or title, right? But that was my learning experience for me. So yeah, get help. It's okay to be new, just get help, get it done right. It's better to do it right. That's going to build a lot more trust in your clients going forward and have them come back to you, the fact that you got it right, than the fact that you just did it by yourself. That's my opinion. Okay, so going back to this, a win-win. This is something that we always have to seek, and it doesn't always happen that way, as I mentioned, but more often than not, it does. At the end of the day, what we have to remember is that whether you're representing a buyer or a seller, who do you need on the other side to make this thing happen? Who else is helping on the other side of the transaction to help get this thing closed? The other agent. So are you on opposite teams? No, we're on the same team. We both want everybody to be happy, right? We both want this thing to close. And so it's important to remember that and realize that, hey, there are going to be times where my client had this expectation or this thing went wrong. We got to call them and I can't believe you guys did this. Right? There are going to be those types of conversations, but I would strongly advise you to do a couple of things. Number one, when something happens that you get angry about because the other side did something or did not do something that they should have done or should not have done. When something like that happens, our emotional response is to get angry. And guess how many times things go well after someone gets angry in a transaction? It's a lot harder. It doesn't happen very often. And again, you have to recognize that that is your job as an agent to take the emotion out of the deal. Now, I will say, having been there, it can be harder when you're struggling for money. I don't know if any of you are in that position. Being new, that probably happens. And so That did for me. And so it can be hard for you to be like, man, I really need this closing. I can't believe they did this. Now it's gonna mess it up. And you get mad because you're emotionally involved. But as much as you can possibly help it, take yourself out of the situation. See what pieces of what's going on in the situation, and then figure out how you can get over it from there in a positive way, as opposed to acting emotionally. If you need to take a step back, take a step back, call them back, say, I don't know how I feel about that yet. I'll give you a call back in a little bit, right? Take a minute, think about it, before you go forward with an angry response or an angry text or an angry call, right? The other thing is, are you guys familiar with the 80-20 rule? The Pareto principle? That can be applied in so many different ways, but one of the ways that it's applied in sales is that 80% of the sales that occur happen by 20% of the agents. And 20% of the sales that occur are by the rest of the 80% of the agents. Does that make sense? Which means what? If you run into an agent on the other side that's selling a house, chances are you're gonna run into him again and again and again. That deal that I just mentioned, that I closed this week, third time I've closed a transaction with this particular agent on the other side in 5 years. Pretty crazy. Had we had a horrible experience the first time, we got angry, we got upset, he'll probably remember that. And now when I have a client that's wanting to buy a home that he's selling, and he remembers me, what do I want him to remember about me?
Smooth, easy transaction.
Yeah, I want him to remember that I work as a win-win. I don't only seek my client's best interest, but I also figure out how we can adapt to your sellers and figure out how we can make things smooth for them, which makes him look better as well, right? If he can go to his seller and say, hey, we found a buyer that will do everything that we want, as long as that's, good for my buyer or whatever, like that's a good thing. So you're gonna run into these people again, because you guys are gonna be top 20%, and you're gonna be having these deals go on, and you're gonna find the other top 20% that's out there. And so you want to make sure that you have positive experiences. One little touch that I've added to my business, I've done it for probably 3 years now, is every time I close a transaction with another agent, which is every time I close a transaction, in my process, one of the things that I do is I write a thank you note to the other agent. Because I recognize that it's not just me convincing my client that, hey, this is the best fit for you. The other side has some responsibilities as well to make this thing close on time and in the right way. So I want to make sure that I develop that good relationship with them as well. So it's just a little added touch that I have done, but try to get a win-win. That's the goal. Okay, any ahas or thoughts before we continue?
It's the aha for me is, like, although for the agents, right, whether you're a buyer or seller agent, it's team effort almost, right?
Yeah.
You still want to be and work in the best interest of your own client, but you do want to close that transaction. So,
Yeah, exactly. And I should add to, like, we do have fiduciary duties to your client.
Right.
You have to keep integrity. You have full disclosure that you need to tell everything to the client. You have confidentiality that you need to make sure that the negotiating parts of your client are not shared with the other side if it does not benefit them. I'll give you one example. Very often as helping sellers sell their home, if they do need to buy another home and they have a very tight timeline, this is a conversation you need to have with your sellers to figure out how you want to go about it. But what I see a lot is that agents will let people know, hey, my clients are under contract. We've got to hurry and get this thing under contract within the next 3 days. What is an experienced agent going to advise their buyer if they want to get that home?
You're gonna be desperate.
They may be desperate, which means what for you as a buyer's agent?
Offer less.
You could offer less, you could ask for more concessions, because the sellers are desperate. So is that crucial information that hurts your negotiating position if you let that out? Absolutely. If your seller gives you permission or wants you to say that, then yes, your higher duty is to be obedient to what they're asking you to do. But I would at least advise them and say, hey, this is probably what could happen if we do let people know that you've got to be under contract by Saturday. More than likely, they're going to offer something less than what we're looking for. Is that a result that you want. If they're like, yeah, that's fine, I don't care, let's just do it, then okay, that's fine. But most often, that's not the case. So anytime you have something like that that can hurt your client's negotiating position, whether it's on the buyer side or the seller side, what are you supposed to do? What's that? Protect your client. By doing what with that information?
Knowing when to review it, they want to.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Most often not revealing it.
the first house I sold, someone committed suicide.
Mm.
So it really hurt my client to mention anything about it.
Yeah.
And it's under the law that I didn't have to. So like, it was hard for me because I was like, I want to tell them so bad, like, it feels like a moral obligation even, but like, I had to do what was best for my client.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta keep these things close to the chest, and it can be hard not to, but that is your duty, that is your fiduciary duty as an agent. Alex?
I don't know if you're gonna go over this later, but on that lines, at what point as a selling agent, like if you have multiple offers, like I thought I heard somebody in a class say that they revealed what the top offer is, but then, like in that way you could, if you don't reveal it, then you could get way more. So,
Right,
like, and then as a buyer's agent, how much do you actually ask? Like,
great questions. Who wants to take a stab at the first one, which was how much as a seller's agent, do you tell them the information? Can you, is that okay? Is that not okay?
Or
Smart.
tell them everything, right? Any offer comes in,
Oh,
you have
to your sellers?
to the
Yes,
seller.
you
yeah.
tell your
oh,
sellers.
no,
everything.
it's the buyer.
But when you're, yeah, when you are representing the seller, you have
Okay.
multiple offers, how much of that information do you share with the buyers?
Oh,
That's just what the sellers are comfortable with.
Yes, and how do we know that?
You talk to them and say, listen, I have this person asking me this. Do you want me to share whatever information with them? If not, I don't have to. And if they're comfortable with it, then you tell them like, hey, max offer is $650 right now. So if you need that.
Yep, and I would take it a step above that, which is to have that conversation with them when?
Like signing the document.
Yeah, and in their listing presentation, have that and say, there is a chance. Don't want to set the expectation that we are 100% going to get you multiple offers because you're going to set yourself up for failure. But there is a chance that we could get multiple offers. In that situation, how would you like me to handle it? When buyers are asking, what's the other offer look like, or how many offers do you have? What information would you like me to share? And more than likely, they're going to ask you and say, well, I don't know, what do you think is best? And then you can have that conversation with them about what you think is best. But ultimately, that's the answer. It comes down to what the seller allows you to say. And now let's flip the script. We're a buyer's agent. What kind of questions are appropriate to ask the seller's agent? Is it okay to ask them if they have other offers on the table? Yeah, totally. That information that would help our client? Yeah, for sure. Is it okay to ask them what the details of those offers are, or what the highest price is that they've got? Trick question. Make you guys think about this.
If the seller's agent allows it,
There you go. Is it okay for us to ask? Totally, because if we can get that information, that is going to help our buyer. But if they don't tell us, that's okay.
along with all these lines, the other agent, no matter which case, whatever you're the buyers or the seller, they should know this stuff too. So they know
Yes,
exact stuff that you're teaching to, and they're telling, and their teams and their brokers are telling them the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be the same for us. Like that's why win-win's number one up there is.
right. But here's the thing
Doing the same thing.
that I found is that I don't want to
If
put
they're
a
good
percentage
agents,
on
if
it.
they're doing what they're supposed to.
Yeah, but here's the thing, like as a buyer's agent, I ask those questions and more often than not, I do get a response. I don't know if they've had that conversation with their seller. I don't know if their seller's given them approval for that. Frankly, I don't care. I represent my client and I'm gonna ask that question because if we can get that information, it's gonna help us.
I was just gonna say that sometimes like I've had sellers, agents not want to tell me like, oh,
Yeah.
what the other offers are. And there's ways that you can phrase it like, okay, if my client comes in at this amount with, closing this day and, deadlines and whatnot. More like they've always been like, oh, like, yeah, that offer will put you at the top, around the top offers,
Yeah.
or no, those deadlines need to be shortened because my seller needs to close here on this date or whatever. So then you can go back to your buyers and be like, listen, they said that your offers would be in the top, say 3 or whatever. The dates, you need to change the dates, or even if they're like, no, the offer's too low, then to go tell your clients like, listen, they have offers that are higher than this. Do you want to offer more, or do you just want to stay where you're at? So.
Exactly, yeah, totally, and it's funny because actually a few months ago, I had an agent, I was representing a seller, had an agent ask, I don't remember what the specific question was, but it was something along the lines of, do you have offers? And my client gave me approval to say that we have X amount of offers, but he did not want me to share anything more than what the offers included. Which I think was a good strategy, and it definitely paid off in this situation. So funny. We were selling this house, we had 2 offers on the table, so I was able to share, we have 2 offers on the table. Then the agent texted back, and what do those offers look like, or what is the price, or something along those lines. And what did my client give me permission to do?
Share how many offers you have.
Only share the number of offers, and that's it. So what do you think I did? What was my response to that agent that's asking for more information?
My client has only allowed me to bullshit.
Yeah. Sorry, totally get why you're asking that, but my client has not given me permission to discuss anything further than the amount of offers on the table. And guess what? It's so funny. This agent, I don't know if it's true or not, but he said he's been in the industry for 20 years. He was upset because that was the first time that anyone had ever told him that. That's my obligation to tell him how many blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know what industry you've been in. I don't know where you've been working, but no, that's not true. That's not how this game works.
Trying to manipulate you.
Coolest part about this situation is guess what happened? He sent in an offer, and the prices that we had listed the home for was $375. The 2 offers we had, one was for $370, a little lower, and one was for $380. So it was just over asking. When they sent in his offer, guess how much they offered? $390. If I had told him $380 was the highest, what would they have offered? Maybe I wouldn't even think, yeah, I think closer to like 381 maybe. Right? They would have beat the other one just by a little bit. So because I stuck to my guns, and the seller has no idea, they don't know this, because I stuck to my guns and was obedient to my clients and had their best interest at heart, how much more money did my sellers walk away with because of that? In my opinion, it's $9 grand, right? So they probably would have done 381. So, pretty cool, right? So stick to, it can be hard because you want to tell them, and especially if they call you on the phone and they're persistent and they're whatever, but you've got to know ahead of time, not in the moment, what you're going to say. Before you get to that point where you're accepting offers, you need to know what the seller wants you to discuss and what they don't want you to discuss. But again, on the buyer side, I ask those questions too. But I call them because I feel like it's easier to get that information when you're calling them than on text. And so I call the agents to ask them those questions, but if they don't tell me, do you think I get mad at them and tell them that this is the first time in 20 years that's ever happened and you don't know what you're doing? No, you don't get upset. Say, okay, so it's totally fine. But at least you tried. Okay. Let's see, let's go to the next one. All right. So we talked about, these are the 3 different areas that we can, the 3 different responses that can occur when you submit an offer. You can get rejected, you can get accepted, or you can get counter offered. Now, if you're a seller's agent and you're only getting 1 offer, and let's say that that offer comes in way lower than what your client is willing to accept, what should you do you think? It's up to the seller, yeah. But what would be a wise option, do you think, in this situation? Of these 3, either accept, reject, or counter? Talk to them about countering. Yeah, I would talk to them about countering. Someone's at least interested in the house. We've gotten that far. Even if their price is way off, they could just be taking a stab in the dark and just hoping for a seller that's in a position where they're just desperate and wanting to move forward. Or they could just be saying, you know what? We are willing to go higher, but let's start the conversation here. To me, oftentimes that's how I interpret that, is let's start the conversation here. And that doesn't mean that your seller has to accept that, doesn't mean they have to get anything close to it. You could still counter offer. Like, let's say that you've got a home listed at 500,000 and an offer comes in at 425. That's pretty far stretch, right? Pretty far. So I would counter and talk to the seller and see what they're willing to do. Maybe they'll go to 490 and you can counter that. Do you think that'll get accepted? You never know, but it could. And so I think it's way more likely to get accepted than if you reject it, because if you reject it, then you have zero chance now. You just rejected them. So even if offers come in lower, unless you're getting multiple offers, if you're just getting one, then no matter what it comes in at, if it's lower, I still think it's wise to at least counter it. Go from there. Let's see. Okay, so we first have to understand who we're kind of our positioning in this, and this slide came in kind of funny. Those arrows don't show up very well, but these are arrows between buyer's agent and seller's agent, right? And we're the in-between people. So in order to negotiate, what do we need to know from our buyer?
How much are we?
We need to know ultimately, how much are you willing to pay for this house? Okay, so like I said, let's say that they say, well, our budget allows for up to 500,000, but we want to offer 475. So do you go straight to the seller and say, hey, but they actually could do 500,000? No, obviously we know that, but why is it important for us as an agent to know that?
Over offer.
Yeah. While we're having conversations with the seller's agent, we can try and see if there's a way that we can make things work, knowing that our positioning, we do have a little bit of flexibility on the price, so maybe we can lean towards that. Or maybe their pre-approval letter came in at 500,000, that is the absolute max they can offer. And even though the house is listed for 510, and you're trying to negotiate, you know you have no flexibility there. And so you try and do other things to appeal to the seller, more than just the purchase price, right? So we need to know what our buyers' intentions are, what their limits are. We need to know their timeline. Like, let's say that they have a rental that they're in and they have to be out by January 31st. And so if the seller's trying to say, hey, we really need more time, we need to close after February 1st. We know our restrictions, we know what we can and can't do. You know, we can't do that, but what we can do is offer $1,000 credit by dropping the price $1,000 or something, right? So you kind of know what pieces you have to work with and what your limitations are. And that applies to the sellers as well, right? And so you're only giving the information that you need to give in order to try and make something happen. But that's who your conversation is with the buyer's agent, seller's agent. Go ahead.
Besides price, what are the other negotiating tools that you use?
Yeah, great question. Any thoughts? What else can you do besides price?
Closing dates.
Dates? And I should say sometimes, because again, these are different ones that you could use, but ultimately we got to figure out what's important to them. But yeah, so dates is one, price, the amount of seller paid concessions. Okay, could be inspection items such as the due diligence deadline. Sometimes they may or may not ask for a home warranty. Sometimes certain things that are included and not included. If you're asking for the fridge and the washer and the dryer, maybe you don't ask for those things. You know, so those are some of the main ones. The type of financing, oftentimes a seller is discouraged by accepting an offer that's an FHA. It's getting an FHA loan. Any ideas why? What's that?
No down payment.
Not necessarily,
The process of the
but the
loan
down payment could be another negotiating piece.
could take longer to close, right?
Could take longer to close, and why?
Just because FHA loans have more restrictions and regulations. and all that.
Yeah,
They're very stringent on flaking paint and.
exactly. They have specific set of guidelines that they have to follow, that basically has an appraiser come out to inspect the home that has to meet certain weird guidelines, like if there's any wood that has chipped paint, they have to repaint that wood. If there's stairs that's 3 or more, there has to be a railing attached, and if there's not, there has to be railing. So they cannot close on the home unless those things are done
For an FHA loan.
for an FHA loan. So even if the seller says, well, we don't want to fix that, but we'll just pay for it so you guys can do it later. In a conventional, that's totally fine. You can negotiate that way all day long, but with an FHA loan, that can't work. They have to get it done, which is why sometimes it takes longer to close, because in order to do that.
Does that have to be done before what date?
So they have to be done before you close. And so what that means is the inspector's gonna have to go back, again, the appraiser guy. And sometimes that takes a while to schedule a second appointment to get them to go back to inspect with them. But yes, they saw the railing cable, good to go. So,
So other cases like for the railing example, like the buyer doesn't want the railing there, but they do FHA loan, like we'll get it and we'll
They
figure it
have
out
to.
later.
Yep.
They can do that. Is that?
yeah.
cool or- okay.
Because they cannot close unless it meets those requirements. So, Alex.
I ask you, oh, my friend had said that years ago, he was seeing just it changes, he said, and he said at one point he saw where you had to fix cracks in the driveway. Have you been seeing anything crazy like that lately, or?
To be honest, I don't know on that one.
Alright.
And those rules do change often. A couple of years ago, I had one where I was representing the buyer through an FHA loan, got accepted. And this was the first time I'd ever heard of the window wells on the outside of the home had to be covered. But I've had other FHA loans that have not had that. So sometimes it does just ultimately go down to the appraiser and how strict he or she wants to be on following those guidelines. It's kind of a shot in the dark, which is why generally, if you get a conventional offer that looks exactly like another offer, but that one's FHA, 95% of the time, sellers are gonna go with the conventional offer.
I say things cracked windows too.
Could be cracked windows, yeah. There's a lot of kind of random stuff, so. I'm not saying FHA is bad, because it can have there's a lot of good things that FHA does for clients and stuff. Don't shy away from that. When you're a seller, when you're representing a seller and you get FHA offers, what you just need to know is. Kind of get familiar with some of those restrictions, so that you know, okay, this house should be just fine, or, yeah, I actually know that there's 3 steps and doesn't have a railing, they're gonna have to install that. So again, these are conversations you can have with the seller ahead of time, so they can either get started on those quicker, or avoid it altogether.
So as a seller's agent, should you be asking the buyer's agent what? type of
100%.
loan?
Yep.
Every time
You get an offer, if you're a seller's agent, they're what I consider to be an absolute must. If they send you a pre-approval letter, well, that's an absolute must. They have to send you a pre-approval letter. But to take it a step further, you've got to do your due diligence and call that lender, have a conversation with the lender. See what they've checked, because sometimes they'll sneak in this pre-approval letter that is actually not, that it's more of a pre-qualification letter, which is different than a pre-approval letter. Pre-qualification letter is more like, yeah, I had a conversation with them. They said they make this much money and I'm sure they'll be fine. Yeah, we'll give them a loan. But they haven't actually checked their credit. They haven't actually checked their income. They haven't seen their taxes. Like, so a pre-approval letter is a little more official because they've actually done their homework on it. But even in those cases, I will call the agent, or I'll call the mortgage officer and I'll ask them a couple of basic questions. Do they have to sell a home in order to pay for this down payment? Or is that money not contingent on anything else? And what type of financing are they getting? Is it a conventional loan? Is it FHA? And I need them to tell me.
If the Reg C isn't the FHA addendum mandatory?
It is, but many times that will come in later. And I'll be lying if I have said that I've never done this before. As a buyer, sending in an offer, getting it accepted, and then bringing in that addendum later on. So, I'm not saying that's advice. Don't take that as advice. But yeah. But that could happen. And so as a seller's agent, that's why I still want to call the lender, because the lender's not gonna, I don't think, less chance of them lying to you about that. If you ask them straight up, is this an FHA loan or is this conventional? They're gonna tell you what it is. And again, that doesn't mean that you go to the seller and be like, this is an FHA loan. We are not gonna even look at this. Like, no, like that's still really good. And most of the time FHA loans close as often as conventional loans do. It's just, there's that one extra little step that has to happen. And so, yeah, if you have given the choice, if they're both the same, maybe go with the conventional, or if the FHA one is a much better one, you could go to that first offer and say, hey, you're conventional, we like your offer better, but we like the terms of this other one better. If you're willing to match this, my seller will go with you. Or, hey, I know you're an FHA loan, we love your terms, but seller just really doesn't like that it's an FHA loan. Is there any way you can do conventional? If so, we'll accept your offer. Like, so there's different things that you could try and do depending on what the seller wants you to do. But ultimately, yeah, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from FHA loans. Don't think they're bad. They're fantastic. There's just that one extra little step in conventional loan stuff.
At what point do you call the lender? Because if you get, sometimes it goes, the other agent will call you, say, hey, my client's willing to give you 500,000 FHA. You say, hey, who's the lender? And you call them right there. Or do you
Yeah.
wait for all like the pre-approval to come in first?
So my process is, I generally like to list homes on a Thursday. and get offers over the weekend. That way by Monday morning, we have offers in hand and you'll be able to see those offers. And if you do have multiple, like you can see which ones are gonna be the top 2 or 3. And so that's who I'll call, is those top 2 or 3. I'm not gonna call, if you'd end up getting 10 or 20 offers, I'm not gonna call all the lenders, but I will call them for those top 2 or 3.
Okay, so if someone called you, just the agent calls you, hey, my client's gonna do 500,000 conventional loan.
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
wait for anything to come through or just say,
Yep.
hey, or do you call?
I always
your-
wait. I gotta have the offer in hand and then I've gotta have the pre-approval. And then I will call that lender before I meet with the sellers.
Okay,
I send them the offer and I upload the documents, like the offer details in a spreadsheet so that myself, that's shared with my sellers so they can see what that is. But then I will sit down with the sellers and have a conversation with them about the offers. And then that moment, before I sit down with them, that's when I'll have already called the lender. So it's usually on Monday. That's just me. Yeah, great questions. Any other questions or comments about this? Has this been helpful at all? You guys learning a thing or two? Okay, it's fun, really fun. Okay, let's move on.
Sorry, one
Yeah,
thing.
go ahead.
And with FHA loans, I just remember this because we have friends that were trying to buy back in 21 and 22 with an FHA loan. And since they're always getting into multiple offer situations, and you really can't go too much over asking price because if it doesn't appraise, they have to bring cash to the table. And most times FHA, people that are getting FHA loan don't have the cash to like cover the gap of the loan.
Yeah,
so-
exactly. And that's part of our due diligence to sellers, agents, is to figure out what their down payment looks like for that specific
Yeah.
reason. But that can apply also to conventional loans, because you can actually, both FHA and conventional loans have programs out there for 0% down. Which means that their client doesn't have to bring anything to the closing table. That can be wrapped up into the loan. But even on those other programs, the minimum down payment for conventional loan besides the 0% is a 3%, which is lower than FHA, which is 3.5%. So sometimes they may be on a conventional loan because of that reason, because they just have very little money. And yeah, if it appraises for any less than what they're offering, then that's when you're gonna have to come up with extra funds or drop the price, which if you're a buyer, you want for them to drop the price. But the seller then has the option to say, you know what, nope, we're not going with you anymore, we're going with somebody else. If that happens, so it's a little risky.
Were you saying that you can ask the lender how much for down there?
Well, on the initial contract, it'll be there. But those on that first page, on
Oh,
page
that's
1
right,
where
that's
it breaks
right, yeah,
down,
yeah, yeah.
but that may not always be accurate, and that can change, and that's okay. And but that is another question that I asked the lender is how much is their down payment? Like, what are they planning? And the reason I asked that, it's not as common anymore, again, because of the industry that we're in, the market the shift that we've experienced. But it still could happen to where, you guys familiar with how the appraisals work? I don't have this whiteboard up here, but, let's say you put in an offer for 400,000. Then it gets appraised 3 weeks later, and the appraiser says, no, 390 is what we're comfortable here with. So what does that mean? There's a $10,000 difference. What has to happen?
They have to cover it or negotiate with the sellers.
Yep, so either the sellers can just say, all right, fine, we'll drop the price to 390, we're good to go. Or the buyers could come up with an extra $10,000 in addition to their minimum down payment required. So keep this in mind, this is very important, because if the buyer is getting a conventional loan program with 3% down, let's just say that comes out to $12,000 that they have to come up with. And that's their down payment. They may not have any extra funds. Or actually, let's play this. Let's do it this way. Let's say that this buyer, they're doing a conventional loan, 3% down, which comes to $12,000, but they have $20,000 they could put into their down payment. Okay, so they're planning to do $20,000, even though their minimum required for that program is 3%, 12,000. Then let's say that there's another guy that wants to buy the house and they're putting 20% down. So $100,000 for this house. But that's all they have, $100,000, that's it. If the appraisal comes in low, then that seller or that buyer that put 20% down has to come up with an extra 10,000 in addition to their minimum down payment required for that program. Right? So in this scenario, this little pretend thing that we're going through, the buyer with the conventional loan, the 3% down that has an extra 8,000 above in addition to their minimum is actually in a better negotiating position than the seller or than the buyer with $100,000 down, because that's their minimum down payment for that.
And the buyer, the 100,000 person just not get a different loan
Yep.
program.
You could, but a 20%, the reason I bring that one up is because that's a pretty critical mark. That if you're an investor, if you're buying something as an investment property, that's usually the minimum you have to put. And so they may not have an option to do 15% down. So, yeah, it just depends, but you could. So the three outcomes of an appraisal coming in low are what? The seller can drop their price. The buyer can come up with the difference in addition to their minimum down payment required. And in addition to their closing costs, so it could be a lot. Or, what's the third option? I guess there's four options, yes, the seller could say, no, we're not doing that. The fourth option is like a mix between the first two. Like say, we'll drop the price $5,000 because we've got an extra $5,000, and then we'll meet in the middle, right? Or it could be, we've got an extra $2,000, that's all we got. So we'll drop the price to $8,000, whatever. So that could happen. Do appraisals ever come in low? All the time. All the time. This market, for me personally, I've actually not seen it. I feel like all of my appraisals have been coming in at value or more, probably for like 6 months. I don't know if that's industry wide. I need to get a poll from everybody else, but for my personal experience, that's been the case. So that may change going forward. I don't know. But, yeah, good question. Glad you brought that up. All right.
Sorry, can you say again, in your experience, how much? Can you say that?
Just the last 6 months or so, appraisals have been coming in at value or more. So we haven't had appraisal issues. I haven't, for a while. But that still can happen. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the 3 Ps of negotiation. Prepare, present, position. We kind of discussed some of this stuff already, but the first step is we need to prepare. It's by knowing what information are we looking for, and who do we get it from?
Or the buyers, sellers.
Either one. What information do we need? First, who do we need to get the information from? Yeah,
I think
our
our
client.
client is the number one.
Number
We need
one.
To be on
Yep,
the same page, and if you're, because I think you can kind of get lost in transactions.
Yeah.
You can be running on one side and the buyer thinks, or whatever your client is in another spot. So it's like you need to communicate where you're like, okay, we're at this part of the deadline, we're doing this.
Yep.
Is it not clear to you where are you at? Like, lots of
exactly.
those conversations.
So whoever you're representing, whether it's buyer, seller, and those items that you'd asked, I think Jordan, you had asked about, what are the items that you can negotiate besides price? Basically, those are the things that you need to ask from the buyer seller perspective. You know what their deadlines are gonna be, or what they can be, what flexibility they have there. You need to go what purchase price if that's flexible, you need to know all that stuff. And in addition to that, it's important for you to know the priorities of those. So in other words, if you get an offer, just as we said, if it has A, B, and C, that's what your seller needs. Well, is A more important than B? So in other words, is price the most important thing for you? And yes, you want this deadline, but if it came down to it, is price more important than that deadline, or is this deadline more important than the price? Right, we need to kind of know their priorities so that when we're negotiating, if we can come to an agreement, we kind of start on the top and be like, well, no, we definitely need that price, so I'm not gonna even talk about changing the price. But we could be flexible on the dates if it accommodates the buyer or the seller, right? So the negotiating terms. So first you need to talk to your client, talk about the negotiating terms. That's the part of the preparation stage, right? Then you present to who? Yeah, to the other agent, whoever they're representing. And you kind of let them know what your ability or what your target is. You don't want to just tell them your priorities. Hey, my buyer needs this first, and then they need that, and then they need this. You want to kind of start with whatever position, and that's what the position is. Move both parties closer into the full agreement. So just kind of trying to figure out what it is that they need, And this is when you have that conversation with them. What is it that your seller needs to make this deal happen? And see if there's a way that your priorities can align, that you can kind of have a meeting of the minds and be like, okay, this is how we can move forward. Right? How is this done? Is this phone calls, is this email, text? Is this in an actual offer with addenda? How is this done? Specifically the conversation with the other agent.
Like, I don't know, this could be completely wrong. I feel like a phone call would be good because then you can get things put across more clearly. Rather
Yeah.
than just text.
Totally. I think definitely in most cases that is true. Sometimes there's, on the other side, they only can text or they only want to text to kind of deal with that. But I like that after the initial agreement is set. So you got to send in your offer first. Send the official offer. But before you send in the offer, and this is part of this is why I keep going back to the other class that somehow is skipped, the make and receive offers. That's when you have that conversation with the other side and say, what does your seller need to make this happen if you're representing a buyer? Or if buyers are asking you as a seller's agent, but sometimes they don't. In fact, make this a part of your every single time you write an offer. Before you write the offer, of course, you have to talk to your client, that's obvious, to figure out what terms to put, but also have a conversation with them.
The other agent.
Yeah, the other agent, the seller's agent, always. I would guess that it's probably only about 25% of the time when I'm representing a seller, do I get a call or at least a text from the other agent asking specifics about what's important to my sellers. Do I want to tell them that? I definitely do. I want to let the buyers know this is what's important to my sellers. Why?
Bring that back to your client
Yeah,
and that's helpful for you to.
of course.
Make the best offer.
Yeah, I want to go back to my sellers and be like, hey, we got an offer exactly what you wanted, right? Or as close to it as we can get. So I want them to ask me, but a lot of agents don't. And so be that agent that will always call the agent to at least ask the questions. And again, I kind of referenced earlier that situation where they asked the information and I told them I couldn't give it. That's fine. At least I can know that that agent is doing his job and trying to ask what's important to my sellers, because he's trying to get, or she is trying to get a win-win. Right? So, yeah, know what you want to know, what your client can do, then have a conversation with the seller's agent and see what you can get out of them. And I'm not trying to do it in a manipulative way, but like see what information they're willing to share and they're able to share. They can help you make a stronger offer for your client that's exactly what their needs are. Because again, price is usually number one, but it's not always number one for sellers. And even if that is number one, then what's the second most important thing to them, and third? And so if you can find that information out, then that's more helpful. So you can tailor your offer specific to their needs. Then, after you have that initial offer and let's say they don't accept it, they're going to apply to a counter offer. Then what Jordan was saying, I totally agree with. I think it's best, if you can, to have a phone call conversation with them, followed up with either the official addendum or an email, depending on how that conversation goes. If it's like, hey, yeah, if your buyers can do X, then let's move forward. And then I talked to my buyers and said, hey, they said if we can do this, we can move forward. Buyers agree, put it in an addendum and send it right back to get accepted. Or have the sellers, or let the seller's agent know and they can put it in an addendum and send it back to you. But however you want to go about it. But I think having a conversation with them is definitely a better way, followed up by something in writing. Because whether it's an official addendum or an email, because sometimes things are forgotten, things are not remembered the same way by two different people. And so to follow up with an email to confirm, hey, just recapping our conversation, this is what we had talked about. I'll talk to my client and let them know and get back to you. I think that's always a better bet. James.
I just want to bear testimony of that point.
All right.
I think that saves the transaction, it saves your brain too.
Yeah.
Like having your clients just email you things, just having notes, even your own notes on your phone, somewhere you can always find it.
Yeah.
For even, we just talked about this today. And then if your client's like, we didn't talk about that, you're like, we did. And we talked about this on this day, and
That will save you. You gotta have a paper trail.
so I think
These
it
conversations.
helps you too, just staying organized and on top of things where you're like, no, we talked about So should we talk about pricing? Can we talk about appraisal, like, so when the appraisal comes, you're like, we did talk about this.
Yeah.
But just to clarify what we were talking, it makes you look a lot better too.
Yeah,
So-
I agree.
I don't know.
Yep.
I'm a strong believer.
Jason? Okay. All right, so diving a little bit deeper into the prepare part, we may have covered a lot of this, so we'll skip over the parts that we've already done, but we gotta know our goal, we gotta know our client's goal, think ahead, set clear expectations for them, be informed, obey the laws. It's a good one. Know the documents inside and out. Okay, you've got to know what's in the Rep C and what's in law. One of the common things that I see all the time is in section 1.1 of the Rep C. Anybody know what it talks about in there?
What was the question?
Section 1.1 of the Rep C. What does it talk about?
It's disclosures of agency.
No,
It's like
not of
the
the,
company,
that is, you're talking about the buyer broker agreement.
you
I'm
know.
talking about the Rep C. So when you're writing an offer for a client to buy a house. What's in
Rep
Rep?
C, that's the. I might be confused, is it 2.1? That's the purchase price?
Yes,
I don't know.
it's not price.
Put in items.
There you go. Don't know where you found that, but that's exactly right. Hey, what do you, we got disconnected. Included items. How many items are listed there? What just happened?
This happens every single class.
Everybody know how to fix it? Anyway, thank you, Cam.
Yes, sir.
Picking that up. Yeah, so how many items are there? I don't know the number, right? Not 20. About 20, yeah, probably about there.
What room is this called?
This is the large training room or the north. Or south, no, this would be the south projector. There you go, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, so there's a bunch of items in there. There's a couple of common ones that sometimes and I know why this happens. It's not that big a deal. But there are certain items in there that are automatically included with the house unless specified otherwise. And some of the common ones that you'll still see as included written out specifically are like ceiling fans, the range hood, the range, those kinds of things. Those are automatically included in the house. We don't need to put them in the next, in 1.2, I believe is where you can put in additional inclusions, right? So those are some things that are helpful for you to know what's included and what's not, because let's say your client really wants the shed in the backyard. And they assume, oh yeah, that's included. I don't need to put that in the contract. Is that one included in 1.1? No. So if they want that shed, you've got to write that in the offer, or else they're not gonna get the shed. And then they're gonna move in and say, hey, there's no shed. Then you get to decide how you wanna go about it. If it were me, I'd buy them a new shed, because that's my fault. I should have known that. As an agent, that's my paying for my education is how I consider it. And I've done that in time too. Go ahead.
I had one where we included like the swing set and a gazebo, and then I was new in the addendum, I added that. But then the lender came back saying that I needed to word it as that it's not part of the loan. Is that like typical, like?
Yeah, it can be when you're talking about furniture specifically, because when they take that to their when the loan gets submitted to underwriting, the underwriter doesn't like to see that you're buying furniture for the loan, right? They want to see that you're buying a house. And so there are certain things like that different lenders will have different requirements and what they're okay with seeing and what they're not. But just like he did in that case, or she, they'll tell you how they want it to be written, and you can do that. There's a form in the MLS that's about like personal property addendum, that you can list out what personal property is being included. A lot of times what lenders will say is, that's fine, you can include that, except that has to be paid for in cash at closing. So they can't wrap that in as part of the loan.
Oh, I think we had put as a purchase price at 0.
There you go, yeah, something like that. That I guess is a little different, but that's another solution that they could have. It's basically they're saying that this is free. So there's no value to these personal items because they're giving them away for free. So that's why they're not wrapped in the loan, because there is no cost. That's how they handle that one. Sometimes if they're, yeah, they can do it different ways. So I just talked to lender on that. But that usually will come up after you're under contract, and then you send the contract to the lender, and then that's when they'll tell you, hey, we need to work this differently. That stuff happens all the time. There's really no actual difference in the transaction from the standpoint of the sellers and buyers, so both parties are gonna sign that, no problem. So it's not a huge deal. Okay. So, yeah, we need to know this stuff. This is how we prepare. We need to ask the right questions to figure out what is important to our clients, right? We talked about that. If it were me, I'd write down again, because my pet peeve, not writing things down that matter to someone, what their priorities are. And again, asking those questions. Okay, let's say that the seller does accept your offer on this term, they like the price, but they want a different deadline, or they want you to pay an extra fee. Which of those two would you probably be okay with, right? Kind of asking questions to get out of them, what are their priorities and in what order? If we can accomplish all of them, fantastic. But if we can't, do you care more about price, or do you care more about being in the home at this certain time? Right? Because oftentimes you can create a little bit of flexibility there. If they absolutely need to be in a home by a certain time, well, maybe we can provide the seller an extra 2 weeks of living in the home for $1,000 or for $500 or whatever. Like, so there's other things that you can do to be creative to help keep their priorities, but you can't do that unless you know what your client's priorities are. You've got to figure out that. Then set clear expectations, allows you to get to know your client and their goal, helps you learn what will make it a win-win negotiation for both sides. Okay, there's two types of questions you can ask, open-ended and closed. Depending on the situation, it's good to have both, a little bit of both. Right, so like closed-ended questions, do you have to sell your home by a specific date? If they say yes, obviously, what's the next question? What day and why? Both of those are good things to know. So it's kind of good to have both closed-ended and open-ended questions in order to figure out their priorities. This is also a good way to phrase things. What would happen if the seller said that they can't move out by this day? Would that cause any problems for you? Well, yeah, because then we're gonna have to be out of this house and we can't move into the new house for a week. So where are we gonna go for a week? You can have that conversation. You know, maybe they get an Airbnb for a week. Maybe they are able to find a way to get the seller to move out a week early. Right, so you kind of play the what if game a little bit, and then asking them, dig deeper. Well, why is that important to you? Because oftentimes what will happen is they'll be talking about their priorities and they'll realize, you know what, well, I mean, yeah, I would love to have a fenced backyard, but if it's not fenced already, that's fine. That's not a big deal. We don't have a dog yet anyway, and we'll fence it later. But you thought that was their absolute number one thing. They have to have a fence, and so having this conversation is helpful to know that, yeah, it'd be nice to have a fence, but if it doesn't, that's not a make it or break it. It's more important that they're in pro, and that's what they really want. Whatever their higher priority is. Okay, let's skip through this. Presenting. So now we got that information from our buyers. Now we're gonna go take it to the sellers or to the seller's agent. Or we got that information from our seller's agent. This is why we present the information to the buyer's agent. So call the other agent, pay attention to nonverbal cues like pauses and voice volumes. Keep quiet once you present an offer. Listen carefully to what is important to the other party. Stay calm and relaxed. Focus on the customer's needs. Give your offer the best chance. All right, there's different strategies when it comes to negotiating. I've had some agents on the other side come at me with very like, this is what we need and you have to do this and it's your obligation and blah, blah, blah. How do you feel like I respond to that?
Noted, thank you.
Yeah, okay, no problem, but I, in the back of my mind, feel like this is an aggressive type agent. If my client has the option to work with multiple people, do you think I mentioned to them my experience so far with that agent? I do. Why?
It may be a sign that throughout the transaction, they might be willing and dealing with your client.
Yep.
And not thinking of the team.
Yeah. exactly. Yeah, I think that's important information for my client to know. Because, yeah, if they have multiple options, and even if they don't, if I've been treated that way already, I will still let them know and say, hey, this is a great offer. I just want to make it clear, from my experience so far with this agent has not been the best, and this is why. I'm telling you right now, like, that's totally fine. I'm happy to handle it, happy to take care of it, but I just want to give you a heads up that they may have things like this happen along the way. Is this something you're willing to try and work through, or is this something you just don't feel comfortable with? And kind of give them that heads up and let them know, because things could happen downhill, and oftentimes how they present, like, most of the time, however they're acting with you in the presentation is the same that they're acting with you later. Most agents don't fake it. They're not fake like that. And so it's going to be a very similar experience throughout. Who has heard of the book called Never Split the Difference? You heard of it? You read it?
I haven't read it now.
You heard of it? So a guy by name, it's written by a guy by the name of Chris Voss, who was the lead negotiator for the FBI for a long time. And he's taught a ton about negotiating. Great book, awesome book. I read that book, and one of the things that I remember that was kind of crazy that you never think about is, like, in his world, a win-win is that people are still alive at the end of the day. There is no such thing as a lose-win or whatever, because if someone dies, like, that's what he was dealing with. We probably, hopefully, will never have to deal with that in our world. But to these people that we're working with, this is such a high, like, emotional process that it can feel like that sometimes, right? Where it's like life and death for these people. And so there's a lot of good tactics that he talks about in there, but more than anything, my biggest takeaway with that is who do you think has a stronger negotiating position? The person that's talking more or less? Less. So just be aware of that. As you're talking to the other agent, give them the information they need, and that's it. Stay quiet, let them say their thing, because a lot of times they'll keep going and they'll tell you more, and then they'll tell you more, and then they'll tell you even more. And that's great, because the more they tell you, the more you can use that to your client's advantage by tailoring the offer to their needs to get them what they want. Or to, like we said, if they divulge that, hey, they absolutely have to be under contract by the end of today, you can stick to your guns a little bit and be like, all right, well, that's our offer. We're not changing it. And then they'll accept it or whatever. So you can kind of learn a lot more from them by just keeping quiet, asking good questions, telling them the information you need, but keeping quiet after that and letting them talk. And that's why the phone call is way easier to have this on, because you can't really do this over text very well. Right. Okay. Negotiating tips. Okay, be professional, keep your goal in mind. Pay attention to your communication and tone with anyone involved in the transaction. Continually refer to your client's motivation when speaking with them. Don't reveal too much. Listen more than talk. Keep your client's motivation close to your chest. Don't be attached to the outcome. Anything stand out to you guys on this?
I think don't be attached to the outcome.
Yeah.
I think so often we're like, this is the only offer, this is the only thing, this is like our final hour, and it's like, no, there's
more than one. There's more fish out there, right? And that is so true. I can't tell you how many times I felt like this is the one and we can't make it work. And then a couple weeks later, we find another one that was way better and it worked better. Right? Like that happens all the time. So just remember, there is not one house only that will satisfy your client's needs. There is not. There are multiple. So they don't just have one chance, right? Okay. I want to share one example of negotiating and why it's important to a couple things. Like James said earlier about getting help where you need it. Dean is awesome. I don't know if you guys have had conversations with Dean yet, our broker, our principal broker. anytime you're in any sort of situation, he's the man to call. Because he will know how to help guide you. He knows the rep C inside and out better than any of his agents do, and can help us navigate that. So he's helped me in multiple situations that have been tricky for me to handle. And one of those was, I share this story because to teach you the power of like the negotiating and to understanding your negotiating position, that trust your gut on where you're at with this. So I had a client that found this home they liked, and it was being sold by another agent, who I won't mention their name, not from this office, so you don't have to worry about that. But they wrote an offer, and I want to try and remember the details very, very well. We wrote the offer on a Saturday night, and it was like, and we had given the seller a response time of like noon on Monday or something. Well, Sunday, seller's agent starts texting me and calling me and saying, hey, you know, I need to talk, we need to talk, get on the phone. So I gave her a call. She's like, this is what my sellers need. They need to have your earnest money, which in this time was a normal thing, their earnest money to become non-refundable upon acceptance. And then we had initially said we wanted 2 days. And I wanted 2 days so my clients could think about it for 2 days while we're under contract and still have the opportunity to cancel if they don't feel good about it in 2 days without losing their $5,000 earnest money. Well, they were putting a ton of pressure on us to like hurry and get this signed, get it done right away. They sent us a counter offer and it has to be done within the next 2 hours. Like they were putting tons of pressure on us to get this done. I talked to my clients and said, hey, like, I don't want you to feel pressured. They're putting a ton of pressure on us. If you don't feel comfortable, that's totally fine. But if this is something you're okay with, this is what they're presenting. So let me know how you feel. They're like, okay. So they called me back about 30 minutes later, like, you know what? Yeah, let's just move forward with it. Let's do it. So we signed, which means if they cancel at any point, their earnest money, their $5,000 is non-refundable. Next morning, 7:30 a.m., I got a call from my client and he was in tears. This was like 6 months ago. Oh no, this was not 6 months ago. This was a year ago because it was in the heat of the market. Anyway, I got a call from my client. He was in tears and he said, I have not slept all night long. I feel horrible. I do not like how I feel for whatever reason. I can't pinpoint it. This is not the right house for us. We have to cancel. And he knew that he was going to lose his $5,000 because we had signed the night before, which I was really bugged with the other client now, especially because they put so much pressure on us. And again, I'm not perfect. I should have been a little more persistent in helping my client be like, look, this is a ton of pressure. Let's not work under pressure. If this home is available tomorrow and you feel good about it, then let's write the offer. That's how I should have handled it in retrospect. Again, you live and you learn, you pay, this is all education. But luckily, like my client knew that it was his choice and he didn't get pressure from me. So he wasn't mad with me, but he was really disappointed and they didn't want to lose their money. And I didn't want them to lose their money. So I called the agent back who had been very pressured and they just said, look, like, I don't know what it is, but my client has not slept all night. They don't feel good about it. They're going to need to cancel. And she was extremely upset and was very emotional and very telling me like, you can't do this. There's no way. You guys agreed to this last night. You don't know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but this is what my clients are going to do. How do you cancel, by the way? Was that enough, that phone call letting them know?
You have to write it out.
Yeah, we got to write it up in the addendum, right? A notice of cancellation. The sellers don't have to sign it because this is just letting them know, hey, we're canceling. But we knew that we would lose their $5,000 earnest money. Well, I said, hey, since it's only 12 hours later, is there, if your sellers are feeling like they would be okay with not basically charging them that $5,000, my clients would really appreciate that. And they feel like it's only fair because they felt so much pressure from you guys last night on a Sunday within 2 hours to get this thing signed that they just don't feel good about it. Like if there's any way you can do it. Any guesses what she said?
No.
A couple things, lots of things, but she said no. And she hadn't talked to her clients yet, which already to me is like, well, that's your first mistake. Like you can't answer for your clients. That is not our job. We cannot answer for our clients when we have not talked to them. She should have said, she could have said, I don't think that they're going to accept whatever she wants. That's fine. But let me go talk to them and then I'll let you know. Well, she didn't say that. She's like, I already know what they're going to say. They're going to say no, and this and this. Because sometimes I feel like, I don't know if this was the case in this situation or not, but she was I felt like she cared to look good for her clients more than anything else. And so she just wanted to get them that $5,000 just because then she could show them like, hey, we just got you $5,000 just because in 12 hours, right? I don't know. That's kind of how I felt. So you've got to talk to your clients, let them decide. But anyway, she goes, finally, after I begged her essentially to go and ask her clients, she comes back, texts me back like an hour later and says, they said no. Okay, so what do? We could cancel. I'll tell you what I did. I didn't cancel yet because their earnest money was already non-refundable. But are the sellers still under contract?
Yes,
Yeah. Sellers can't cancel unless what?
you have a notice.
Okay, if the buyers cancel, but do the sellers have an option to cancel?
Yes, but they're gonna give double the first one.
Not double. Usually it's the amount of the earnest money. It's up to the buyer actually to decide how they want to go about the damages. But most of the time, it's the equal amount of the earnest money. So if the sellers just send us a cancellation, then they would have had to give us essentially $5,000. So they didn't want to do that. So I talked to Dean, by the way, about my idea, just to make sure that we're covered. And I said, hey, Dean, what do you think about this? They're being mean. They don't want to give this money back. We're already under contract. Our contract doesn't expire for 3.5 more weeks. Technically, we could wait to cancel until the day before that day and then cancel, and the sellers can't do anything about it. Is that a good negotiating position?
Because they had to wait 3 weeks.
They had to wait 3 weeks to go find another buyer. Legally, they could not go find another buyer and get under contract with anybody else. Even though I told them we're gonna cancel, they did not have the notice of cancellation. So that's what we did.
What the agent say?
Oh, she was mad. She was very mad. And
Is there a reason why you won't tell us the name? So we don't run into this?
to be honest, I don't remember her name,
Okay.
but I could look it up, but I don't want to do that.
Just, okay.
Maybe she's changed. She's probably better now.
So just to clarify, you had sent in the offer, they had accepted it?
They had so we had sent in an offer and then they sent us a counter offer saying, we like your offer, but we need that earnest money to become non-refundable immediately.
So isn't legally, they haven't got to a binding contract, so couldn't.
Well, but then my buyers, they did accept that. So we signed
Oh,
saying,
and then
okay,
he
fine, we'll do
changed
it.
his mind.
Then the next morning is when he called me and said, I feel horrible.
Did they wait the full 3 weeks or whatever?
That's funny you asked that. She was so mad and she was like, you can't do this. You're gonna cancel, so you've got to do it. I'm like, sorry, I've got my client's best interests at heart. So here are your options. You can give us that $5,000 back. And we'll cancel right away. Or we can wait 3.5 weeks and then cancel. Because my clients already, in their minds, like they already lost their $5,000. They're not buying that house. That's not gonna happen. So they've kind of already moved on. But now I'm trying to like help my clients at least get some of that money back. So long story short, we went days and days. She was still mad. She would text me every couple of days. Please send us that cancellation, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, you already know what we're gonna do. And then it was about 2 weeks later that she finally was like, all right, would they accept half or something? It was some, or like 3,000. So in other words, they would lose $2,000. My clients would get $3,000 back. And my natural response was like, no, I don't want to do that. We're getting our $5,000 back. But I don't want to answer for my clients. I went to my client. They knew what was happening this whole time. And I just told them, I was like, hey, they're presenting this. Is that something you guys would be okay with? And they're like, yeah, let's just do it and be done. Okay. So that's what we did. That's what we settled on. So we got the $3,000 back. Seller had to wait 2.5 more weeks to sell their house again, somebody else. So I thought it was pretty cool, but it's because I knew our negotiating position. We had kind of already lost it. And so at this point we had nothing more to lose. Only they did. And so the best chance, they could have given it all back, which I really, to this day, I think it's so ridiculous. They would not give $5,000 back that really they had no right of keeping. 12 hours later, if they had multiple offers, which she claimed that they did, they could have easily gone to one of the other offers and said, hey, you won. And nothing would have been skipped. Like they wouldn't have lost a day. So anyway, that's the story. So a couple points there. Know your negotiating position, but also talk to Dean because he knows your negotiating position. He can help you figure that out and making sure that you're doing things legally but you have your client's best interest at heart, whatever that might look like. Hopefully that never happens again. That probably won't, but that was a stressful few days. Okay, last little bit and then we'll wrap up. Oh, this was the last little bit. Any ahas?
I know what to do now. Yeah. Didn't know. Back and they want back up.
Yeah, exactly. No, most of the time I won't.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't know that FHA loans that they'll like go and look at pain and like every little thing
Mhm.
that you have to fix up for this. That's-
Yeah, I don't know if there's an actual list that we can look up. I don't know. But
'cause I just thought it was just because they take longer, because I didn't realize that.
But that's usually why. But I've had plenty of buyers with FHA loans that close just fine. And oftentimes those things are never come up. Like it's actually been very rare for them to get a house that has those needs. So just depends. But that's something to be aware of, both on the buyer side and on the seller side. If you are walking through the home with them and you see chipped paint, that should be the first thing that comes to your mind, like, okay, this could potentially come up in the future. What I normally do is let the client know at that point and say, hey, I don't want you necessarily doing all this extra work. Although today's market's a little different, we gotta dress up our homes a little nicer, so I might change that conversation now, but. I would say in that time, we don't necessarily need to do that, but just letting you know that certain loans may require us to do this, so just know that's a heads up. Then once we get the offers and we see, yep, this FHA loan is our best option, let's go with it. Then they can already get a head start in painting that so that it cannot delay the process.
So I was an agent in Bryce, and so it's a whole different world. That's why I'm a little bit more nervous about negotiating here.
Sure.
Different.
Just
So the
different.
main thing is earnest money that I'm wondering about, because
Okay.
there, it was 500 to 1,000, even during peak. Like
Really?
COVID, it was nothing, and not accepted all the time. So here, it was, I would imagine more during COVID, right?
Yeah.
So now are we getting more towards more reasonable numbers, and what kind of are those?
Yeah, good question. So with the earnest money, and you guys know how earnest money works, what it's for, what its purpose is, all that. Like earnest money is for the buyers, that goes toward their down payment. It's not in addition to their down payment. That is part of their down payment. They just have to have that portion of it paid sooner than the rest of their down payment. Within 4 calendar days of getting an offer accepted. And so the earnest money is really just showing to the seller, like, yeah, we're earnestly seeking to buy this house. Like, that's where that term comes from.
It's like putting their name in for the,
Yeah, like they're really wanting to, and they put the money down for it. That doesn't mean it's done yet. They still have to do their inspection, their financing and appraisal and stuff, but they're showing that they're committed to it. Normally, when is the earnest money due? I mean, not due. When does it become non-refundable?
After due diligence. Whatever you put in the.
after
contract, right?
appraisal.
Financing and appraisal deadline. And after the due diligence deadline. Could be both.
This is due diligence usually before
Yeah,
financing, appraising.
yeah, usually due diligence is 10 to 14 days, and this is all up to you guys with negotiation stuff too. Some of this could be another negotiating piece, right? Is to say, hey, we'll do our home inspection in a week or in 5 days. But yeah, whatever the due diligence deadline is, your client could cancel up until that date for any reason. And what do they have to tell the seller about why they're canceling? Nothing, doesn't matter. There's just a notice of cancellation. We are canceling before the due diligence deadline. There you go. They don't need to know anything. It could be any reason, like in my client's situation, he just did not feel good about it. He didn't even have a specific reason. He just didn't feel good about it. Years later, I mean, I know now why, not years, a year later, I know why, but they found another house that's better and they had family stuff that happened. Anyway, kind of cool how that went down, but yeah, due diligence deadline, they could cancel for any reason. What about after the due diligence deadline, up until the financing and appraisal deadline? Could they cancel and get their earnest money back? Generally, yes. They can. What do they have to tell the seller? Canceling because why?
Financing bill.
For financing reasons. That's it. They don't need to know anything else. So if your client gets to a point, and this is Dean, this comes from Dean, I'm not making this up. If your client gets to a point after the financing appraisal, or after the due diligence deadline, and they say to you, we just found out that, I don't know, that there's a problem with the roof and that's gonna cost us, we just found out, we got a bid back and it's gonna cost us $2,000 to fix the roof. We just don't wanna deal with it. We wanna cancel. Is it too late? No, according to Dean, they can simply say, it's a financing reason. That's it, that's all I have to say. So it's not trying to trick anybody, but it's like, because at that point, their value of that house is not worth it, and so for financing reasons, I'm gonna cancel because the value of the home dropped. So I don't feel good about financing. That makes sense, but you don't have to explain it, you just have to say it's for finance, before the financing appraisal deadline, that's it.
So could though the agent do some investigation and then they could be legally,
Nope. That doesn't happen.
um,
Yeah. So technically, financing appraisal deadline is when the earnest money becomes non-refundable. Right? However, that can be different if you write it up differently. And in the heat of the market, when we were going through that COVID years, 2-3 years, it was extremely common for the due diligence deadline or for the earnest money to become non-refundable within either upon acceptance, which is crazy, but that happened for a while, or within a week or, on the due diligence deadline or anything else. However, if it's a cash offer, when is their earnest money non-refundable? By default, not immediately,
24 hours.
not 24 hours. Due diligence deadline,
Oh.
because there is no financing and there is no appraisal. So that condition, the financing appraisal condition is marked not required. So that puts the due diligence deadline as the deadline for the earnest money to become non-refundable.
Is that if it's full cash or would it's like,
That's when it's full 100% cash. Yep. So no financing at all involved. But again, all of this that we just talked about is the default. So unless you specify otherwise on the contract, that's how it would look. So you may be in a situation where there are multiple offers on a home. And you may be able to have, you may represent your buyer, and to be stronger, you may tighten up that deadline and say, hey, if we cancel within 7 days, if we cancel after 7 days, you get to keep our earnest money. We're agreeing to that. You may, that's one way to strengthen your offer if you need to. It's not wise to waive the due diligence deadline because you're also waiving your right to even visit the property again during that time, and you're waiving some other rights. So if you ever have to do that, then you can still have a due diligence deadline, but just keep it a lot tighter. A couple of days out if you need to. If you don't believe me, he's getting lunch, you can ask him. But yeah, great. Ahas. Anything else before we wrap up?
I did have one last question. This
Yeah.
might be a lender question. So when we were talking about FHA and conventional loans, with both of them being able to do a low down payment, why would someone go in an FHA loan if there's
Yeah.
EMI on the lifetime?
Good question. Most of the time, it's an income reason or it's a credit score reason. There's certain income restrictions and with that, but also the credit score. If they have a lower credit score, FHA can allow them to still get into a loan than conventional. So usually it's for that. And then also their upfront costs, I believe, are different too. They're less for FHA. But yeah, good question. So there are still perks to it. Yeah, so overall, don't be afraid of the negotiating. Just take out the emotion. Do not be emotional about it. Know what your client needs and what their priorities are so that you can aim for that first and hopefully get them everything they need. But if you can't, at least you know what their priorities are so you can get them the most important things. And ultimately, if you can't work it out, then that's okay. Like I said, there's other properties out there. You've got to have that mentality that this is not your last chance. This is not the one only hope. There are, even if you haven't seen one in a while, like they can come up. So, any last questions or ahas? Okay, thank you guys for coming. Hopefully it's effective. Let me know if you have questions.